Hi everyone. I would like you to take your seat and we'll start with the conference. I welcome you all to this 11th Interdisciplinary Conference titled The Academics in the Community. My name is Jonathan Couturier. I am the Vice President Internal Affairs at GSAÉD. Before proceeding any further, I will ask you to turn off your cell phone. This talk will be held in English only, and if anyone has a question to ask and is not comfortable to ask it in English, we will do our best to translate it. Donc, je vous souhaite la bienvenue à cette conférence interdisciplinaire. Donc, c'est présentement la 11e. Elle est intitulée Les universitaires dans la communauté. Je suis le vice-président aux affaires internes à la GSAÉD. Avant de continuer, je vais vous demander d'éteindre votre téléphone cellulaire pour le respect des autres. Puis, s'il y a des gens qui ne se sentent pas confortables de poser leurs questions en anglais, nous allons faire notre possible de traduire votre question. Puis, and now I will start by saying what is the true meaning of this conference to our graduate students. It is one of the only chances they have to share their research experience at the University of Ottawa. It is also a place where the barrier between the disciplines is no more present. I would like to thank all the students who are presenting their research, since they are putting a lot of energy in those presentations. I invite you to consult the conference schedule in your program and attend their talk during the day tomorrow and Thursday. The second goal of the Interdisciplinary Conference is to invite speakers based on the title of the conference. In the past, we had great talks from speakers like David Suzuki, Lewis Laffman, Stephen Lewis, Lister Sinclair, and so on. They have given great talks in different disciplines like the protection of the environment, the political issues, linguistic minority, women fighting for their rights. This year, the topic of the conference is the academic in the community. This year, we invited Caroline Andrew, who is a professor of political studies. She is a former dean of the Faculty of Social Sciences. She gave a great talk this afternoon on the academic commitment in the community, multiple models and possibilities. Tomorrow at 2 p.m. at this location, we will have Victor Simon, who will talk about a topic touching more the graduate student. His talk will be about the 5-year facility renewal and expansion, the spaces needed for graduate students at the moment, and the contract between the private sector and the university. It will be held in French and English. Demain, jeudi, à 13h, le professeur Néry Saint-Amand de l'École des services sociaux de l'Université d'Ottawa fera une présentation sur l'apprentissage par l'engagement communautaire. Cela résume que les études universitaires sont beaucoup plus que l'obtention d'un diplôme et que c'est aussi ce que nous pouvons apporter à la communauté avec celle-ci. Thursday at 7 p.m., we will have Ignacio Chapella from Berkeley University. His talk will be about the environment, and the title is Reason Exhausted, Science, Environment, and the End of Progress. And if you want more information about the events, I have presented tonight. It is available inside your program, and you can also visit our website, conference.gsaad.ca. Si vous voulez plus d'informations sur les événements que j'ai discutés ce soir, vous pouvez soit consulter votre programme qu'on a distribué au début de la soirée, ou soit venir sur le site de la conférence, conférence.gsaad.ca. After the talk, there will be a period of questions, to which I invite everyone to ask a question, because we are allowed. I will only allow one person to ask a question, not only one person, but one question per person. And And I will also limit the question time to 2 minutes. So like the person asking his question will have 2 minutes to ask his question, and then our keynote speaker will answer the answer. So, après la présentation, il y aura une courte période de questions. Donc, j'invite tous les étudiants et les invités ce soir à venir poser leurs questions. Donc, vous aurez une période de 2 minutes pour votre question. Pour quand même laisser le temps aux gens de poser toute une question. Donc, une question par personne. On essaie d'être équitable. And now, I will invite Federico Carvajal to give a short introduction on number of Finkelstein. He is Vice President Services.
Good evening, everyone. Tonight, I'm honored to introduce an outstanding scholar, a well-published researcher, but above all, an uncompromising academic who will speak out and speak out, regardless of the resistance mounted by powerful interest groups. Dr. Finkelstein's research spans a variety of topics that many academics have either sidestepped or simply ignored, in fear of reprisals and backlash from a powerful Zionist lobby. Among his publications, we find Beyond Chutzpah, The Holocaust Industry, Image and Reality of the Israel-Palestine Conflict, A Nation on Trial, and The Rise and Fall of Palestine. Norman Finkelstein received his doctorate in 1988 from Princeton University and taught until recently at DePaul University in Chicago, where in a controversial decision he was denied tenure in 2007. We're pleased to have such a distinguished scholar with us today. So I'll ask that everyone join me in welcoming Norman Finkelstein.
Thank you for inviting me, and I was trying to, at the last minute, reformulate my remarks for this evening because I'm not a specialist on Canada. I know much more about the American scene, and I want to make sure my remarks are relevant and resonant for you all this evening in Canada. What I want to do this evening is basically make 4 kinds of argument, interconnected arguments. Number 1, I'm going to argue that, unlike until the recent past, the record on the Israel-Palestine conflict now is pretty straightforward and uncontroversial. The historical record, the contemporary record, which basically means the human rights record, and the future record, that is to say, how to resolve the conflict, the legal diplomatic record. There's very little controversy any longer surrounding that record. You can call it a broad consensus, agrees on what happened, what's happening, and what's the most desirable way to resolve the conflict, how to resolve the conflict in the future. That's the first claim I'm going to make. The second claim, which is interrelated with the first, is that this record, as it's now understood, is incompatible with the conventional, traditional liberal values, such as the rule of law, and so forth, to which American Jewry and North American Jewry generally has subscribed in the modern era. The sorts of values which allowed North American Jewry to flourish. Those values, in particular, but I'll return to it later, the rule of law, those values are incompatible with the historical record, with Israel's historical record as we now understand it. Number three, the old tactics, the tactics which were typically used to divert attention from and sow confusion about what this documentary record shows. Those tactics are no longer working. They're no longer, to use the fancy word, efficacious. And in particular, the exploitation of the Nazi Holocaust and the recourse to this claim of a new anti-Semitism, those sorts of diversions are no longer successfully used to sow confusion about this record, which I'll go through in a moment. And finally, for all of those reasons, namely the broad consensus on the record, the fact that this record is incompatible, fundamentally incompatible with liberal values, the fact that the old tactics for diverting attention from that record are no longer effective. For all of these reasons, it's now become fairly well documented. The American jury, in particular, North American jury, in particular, the under 40 generation, is drifting away from Israel. And there are some very significant indicators of that fact. I should say at the outset, just to establish what I'm doing and what I'm not doing, there doesn't seem to be much disagreement among those who study the phenomenon that a North American jury are drifting away from Israel. The question that has arisen is why? And that's the question I want to address this evening, and I'm putting forth my own interpretation. You can call it my own thesis, my own speculation, my own hypothesis on why this drift is occurring. Let me begin with the first part, which to my thinking is the more important part, because it's the part which is not open to speculation, hypothesis. It's the part where we can look at a documentary record and examine it pretty closely and reach conclusions about which I think most rational, reasonable people can agree. As I said at the outset, there doesn't seem to be any longer much controversy on the nature and future, the desirable future, of the Israel-Palestine conflict. And let me begin with what I take to be a fairly vivid illustration of the point I want to make. I suspect this is a reasonably informed audience, and so all of you are familiar, or most of you are familiar, with some of the jargon of what's called the peace process. And one of the terms that frequently comes up in the jargon of the peace process is this term, the final status issues. And the final status issues refer to those aspects of the Israel-Palestine conflict which are said to be so controversial that they have to be deferred, put off, to the last stage of negotiations. And typically those final status issues are enumerated as one, the borders of the Israeli state and the borders of a future Palestinian state. Two, the settlements, the status of the settlements Israel has built in the occupied territories and the 400,000 or so settlers in the occupied territories, Jewish settlers in the occupied territories. Three, the status of Jerusalem, East Jerusalem. And four, the question of the refugees. There used to be a fifth question, namely the question of water, but that's pretty much disappeared in recent years, so I won't belabor that point. Now, as it happens, in July 2004, the highest judicial body in the world, the International Court of Justice, it was asked by the General Assembly to rule on the legality of the wall that Israel has been building in the West Bank. And in July 2004,